Thank you all for coming to the last talk of the day. Thank you for the effort. This talk is about Behat. I'm Berend de Boer. I'm from New Zealand and I work for Explain Hosting. My claim to fame is to be the first Drupal programmer in 2004. And actually I have fathered even a second generation Drupal programmer. So that has gone on in the family. Explain Hosting hosts small sites, and for larger sites we do custom setups. One of our clients is LJ Hooker, New Zealand. Australia does their own thing. If you've ever touched an old website, hey, you have had this feeling, obviously. You never know if you change something, what breaks. Hey, maybe you have to test everything, and most people don't. So, and that sometimes goes wrong. And that's where Behat comes in. So in this talk, I'll tell you a bit what Behat is, how to get started, how do you write tests, and how do you write good tests. That's a bit of a difference. And there are a whole lot of slides on issues you may encounter, so that's why I call this a concise guide. I probably won't go over all the slides, but please access then the presentation afterward and see at specific problems you may encounter, or I can say you will encounter when writing Behat tests. I think I solved them all, and I have a slide on each of them. Behat, or the kind of testing, behavior-driven testing, is you find it in this book, the Cucumber book. I suggest you buy it. Definitely helpful. What is Behat? Behat is a way of testing your entire website. So it's not testing a function or a module. Now it looks at your website as a customer would do. You can use an actual browser, and the techie definition is it's a PHP framework for auto-testing your business expectations. And that's a key word, business. It's not a programmer tool particularly. It's very helpful for programmers, but you look at it from a business perspective first. So how does it work? Let me see if that comes up here. I'll run this tool Behat, and I load a single feature that should hopefully load up a browser. And it did its work. So as you can see, you load an actual browser and it executes actual things in the browser, clicking or filling in forms. That's pretty powerful. The test I just ran was this one. Basically, go to the home page. When I follow login and I fill in these things and I log in, then I should be on this particular page and I should see some kind of text. So what is the goal when we do tests like this? Test the entire website as a visitor. The tests we write should be readable by stakeholders, and that's the business perspective. They should not be brittle. A problem you see a lot with tests, and they're too brittle. They break all the time, people stop using them. And if your test passes, you can promise something. This is my website can do at least this all the time if it's automated. So installation is easy, none of these privacy accept agreements. You just install it as with Composer. What you do is install the Drupal extension. You can read it at your leisure later. So we initialize the test. That's the Behat init step, which creates a particular file, feature context. I'll talk about it later. And then the next or the final step is create a YAML file, the Behat YAML file. And that looks like this. Certain fixed keywords need to go in there. Let me focus a bit on about HV, Selenium 2. That's the part of Behat that does website testing. You can pick your browser, so you can test Firefox, you can test Chrome, you can give options, so you can actually test mobile Chrome or mobile Firefox. And your base URL, obviously quite important. And that's the main URL for your website, the default one your test will use. We need a bit more magic, so after installing Behat in your website, you need Selenium standalone server, which you can download in the link here, and you need to run that. And the final bit, you need a browser-specific driver, which needs to be in your path, because the Selenium standalone server will start that specific browser-specific driver. And that was pretty easy. And then we can go on to look in more detail at a particular test. So how do we write tests? A file starts with the keyword feature. It has to be in there. And actually extension of your test is .feature as well. Every feature contains one or more scenarios. Scenario consists of steps, and a step starts with given, when, or then. And you can extend a step with and or but. This is actually a language that is described in the Cucumber book I showed you before. It's the Gherkin language, and the goal is, when you write these tests, is they are business readable. They may be domain specific, but they should be readable by business people. A bit more detail than writing a feature. So feature, anything goes after that, and if you indent with spaces, you can continue that. It's free format. Scenario follows this pattern. So you get your system in a particular state, like there is a user, or I'm on a homepage, I do something, poke or tickle it, examine if indeed that state has been reached. So we do that by using steps. Set up the system in a particular state, you use then the given keyword. And then when to interact, when I click or when I press or when I fill in, then I should see, or then this field should have that value. For the Gherkin language, it doesn't really matter if you use given, when, or then. It will execute it anyway, but it just makes it much more readable. So really use these three kinds of steps. What steps are there? Yeah, given, when, then. That's nice, but what follows after that? We can actually examine for a particular system what steps there are. That's something you will use a lot when you start to write your first steps. I have here, I hope that's readable at the back as well, this screen. I can make it slightly bigger maybe. Put it in the center. So here I can simply dump all the kind of tests I have. And this, I can filter them obviously. I could say field, something with the word field in there. Oh, I have all these steps available. Given for this field, I enter the value. It allows you to sort of discover what steps, have pre-built steps there are. So here we have that login example again. The feature, any kind of text scenario, any kind of text, and then given, when, and then we continue to when with these and steps, then I should be in that state. But if you look at this, it's something you would repeat every time. If I have these steps, log in, for lots of scenarios you have to log in and you have to fill in these things. Pretty annoying. You're repeating yourself. That's an anti-pattern, don't repeat yourself. What we do, we can improve that, so I'll give you a few options here. You could use a background. We haven't covered that yet, so you put it after the feature, and it's run before every scenario. So you could write it this way. Feature would be adding content. Background is then all these login steps. And then on line 8, the scenario starts. Admin can add content. It will execute at that point all the background steps, and then it continues at line 9. Okay, that's already better. At least for this feature, I don't have to repeat all these steps. What's option number 2? That's a custom step. So if I have this particular scenario, I have here the step given I'm on the home page, but it actually doesn't exist yet. So how do we write these steps? We'll come to that. And to write these steps, we'll need a bit of access to Drupal, and that's where the Drupal driver comes in. If you remember this from the Behat YAML, probably not, but one of the sections said black box. Black box means as no particular driver, so the null driver. But the drivers you want to use is either an API driver that allows you to write steps which have full access to your Drupal modules, or a Drus driver. That's very handy, so you can execute your tests against a remote site through Drus if it has been set up properly. So you install that as follows, and then you put it particular driver in your YAML file. So you can look that up later. And the final step is in your feature file you need to have an API tag, and if you then write that particular step, let me see, that's the next one I think. Oh yeah, so what we get then is a scenario, user logs in as admin. No, sorry. Yeah, so that was the actually, before we come to custom step, we have the option number 3. Once I have the Drupal driver, it gives me actually even more steps which are available, pre-built steps which I don't have to write myself. And that is the option mentioned here. I can actually say, given I'm logged in as a particular role, so given I'm logged in as administrator, that's the pre-built role, or editor, or site administrator, whatever roles you may have on your Drupal site. In this case, you with the Drupal driver, this custom step will know what roles there are in your system, create a particular user, a random user, give that user these roles, and then you can log in and as this role. And that makes for pretty clean, concise steps. Okay, let's get back to writing a custom step, and then we'll take this example. So the user logs in as admin. We pick the custom step from the Drupal driver, given I'm logged in as an authenticated user, and then the one we want to write is, and my profile has been filled in. If I write that code, but Behat wouldn't know about, and my profile has been filled in. What does that mean? So if you run this, you'll get a nice piece of output from your Behat program. It creates a short snippet here, which you then can copy-paste into feature context. This particular step, let me go back here. What it generates here is a comment, puts in the given keyword and then the full name of the step. How that works, Behat uses PHP doc annotations to bind patterns to feature context methods. You have these rules here. It needs to start as a particular comment. It needs to follow this particular pattern. And you can even put arguments in there. All step definitions are done that way, even these built-in steps, they all follow the same way. PHP doc annotation before your public function. You can put custom or multiple given givens as annotation there, they will all match. And even you can put a variable in there, as you see in this example, on the given I'm logged in as user with the colon role, which that's a special keyword, colon, meaning this is a parameter. So if you write a test that particular word, that location will be passed in as a parameter to your function. So if we go back to the pending step, which was just generated, we can actually implement that step. This is a slightly simplified version. So I have these particular things, assert click. Where do they come from? Well, that comes with your, if you install Behat and the Drupal driver, it gives you, and Selenium, they come with all these things to access your browser. You can actually see them here. So if I say assert click, or simply click maybe. So what I'm doing here, I'm searching these pre-built steps, and one of them is, I see when I click a particular link here, I can see, that's actually implemented right there, and that function name is called assert click. Okay, that's how I discover all these pre-built steps, which I can use in my custom step. Custom implementation picks then all these steps to drive your browser, and you can have access to the entire tooling, so clicking, selecting buttons, and actually testing as well. Assert that there is a success message. That is something someone implemented in the Drupal driver, meaning a success message that actually looks at the message region, and it has to be a success message, not an error message. So I demonstrated that a little bit already. How do we find out about these steps? We call the Behat program with the D parameter and then some piece of text, and hopefully it finds it. Let's then come to how to write a good test. Let's see, for this one here, let's write a test for Twitter. And the scenario is retweet. So how could we write a test? Given I'm on the home page, and then when I fill in what's happening with hello world, and I press tweet 1, and I click reply, and I fill in tweet your reply with tweet 2, and press reply, then the reply should be 1. Fairly readable. But this one is much better. When I tweet hello world and I reply to my last tweet with tweet 2, then the reply should be 1. That's extremely clear. This going back to that first one, this is the kind of test people tend to write. I click this, I fill that in, then I go there. It's not business readable. It's a very techy way of looking at tests. This one is actually most business people could read this. If you have the ability to write these custom steps, you can actually implement it that way really easily. But don't forget that sometimes if you write custom steps and you make it nice and short, some information may be lost. So if you look at account creation steps, this looks like a fantastic site. Given I'm on the news article page, when I click comment, then I should see you must be logged in. Okay. So far so good. What then? What do I need to do? No, the test continues. When I click on create account, I fill in the email, fill in the password, check I'm not a robot, I get my street signs wrong, I have to do it over again and again and again. I have to wait for the confirmation email to arrive. I click on the link in the confirmation email, click on login, I finally can actually log in. Context is lost, need to go back to the original news article, and then finally I can put some comment in. If you have a website that works like that, people have to be very, very keen to put a comment on there. So having a test like this, where you write all these steps out, makes it immediately visible that this website is unusable, unless people are really keen. They're not going to contribute. What we want to do for Behat to use it well is not use these built-in steps. Click here, go there, visit this. You write your own steps. What it is, you can avoid writing brittle steps. So instead of that whole process, I fill a username in, I pass it in, log in. As soon as you make any change there, the label instead of username it becomes email. All your tests fail. That's a brittle test. But if you had written a custom step, given I log in, and then you have to only modify that little function you wrote, your own step, your custom step, done. All your tests pass again. I keep stressing that steps which business analysts can understand. Very important. Another tip if you want to write good tests. Is that the sequence to avoid. So don't write scenario given this and then use these given. Put your site in a particular state. When I do this, something happens, then, given when, then. That's the sequence you want to have. So, how do you get your company to do Behat? How to get started with Behat? There's a lot of value you can get out of it. So, how do you do that? An easy way is, you have to start somewhere. When a bug is reported, then write a test that replicates it, and the test should fail. It looks a lot like test-driven development, that's where that comes from. You fix the bug, then the test should pass. That's your first test done. If you do that, keep doing it for every bug, pretty soon you have a fairly comprehensive test suite. An easy way to get your company doing Behat. The other reasons your company might be interested in doing Behat is these tests also can function as documentation. They function on how to use the site. What is it for? What do we expect users to do? We have these scenarios. We cover these particular scenarios we think the user will actually use to engage with us. The second reason you might be interested in Behat is have it as acceptance tests. So even before you start coding, you could write up all these tests, and if all tests pass, you're done. Project is finished. You can use it as a project management tool. You can see how far you are in the project. If all tests fail, you're at the beginning, 50% are done, maybe you're 50% of the way, or at least you're getting closer to the end. And for programmers, it helps them to tell what code to write. Every time, for all steps that fail, Behat will put something in red. So you know, okay, I need to work on that. That's my next step to finish. So and that's if you want to have a new website or work on a new website. Why not write all requirements as scenarios? Implement all steps as deferred. They're pending, they have to be written. And what you see then when you run all your tests, you get this. You have the step, and my profile has been filled in. If you run that, Behat will say, to do, write pending definition. At the bottom it gives you a list of scenarios it has run, and how many passed, and how many are pending. And another interesting thing you may discover is if you work that way, that's on this someone who discovered that is when you start using Behat or Cucumber in this case, you write your scenarios, but if you find a bug, it might not always be a bug. As it says here, almost without exception, every one of those bugs could be traced back to a gap in the Cucumber scenarios we'd written for that part of the system. And because we wrote those scenarios with business people, it wasn't. It was clear that wasn't anybody's fault. There was a bug, but an edge case, something we had not anticipated at that time, and had to make it clear to the business why there is a bit of a delay. There's something we hadn't thought about before. Maybe it leads to happier teams as it continues. And bugs are a big source of friction and unhappiness in software teams, and you get blame from two sides. But if you collaborated in writing these tests, and it is clear, actually you don't have a test for this. There's no scenario that covers people doing this. We can see, it's maybe both of us were amiss, or we see that there is something we didn't think about. You may have happier teams. So who writes tests? Why not analysts and stakeholders? Why should programmers write tests? Project leads or business people, they can write tests quite easily. Scenario, when I log in, then I should see my current weather, and the temperature should be in Celsius. They can write something like that. That's pretty easy. And you as a developer then implement these steps. And here then a slightly more technical bit of the talk. Hey, you've done all these things, but once you as a developer start using these tools, you may encounter a few common problems. One of these things is seldom you want to run your entire test suite. If it grows and grows, that can take minutes to an hour easily if you cover a whole website. So what you can do, you can run a single feature. That makes it, a feature still contains all the scenarios, could still take a few minutes. So you can drill down to just run a single scenario. I use that all the time when I fix bugs or work on a particular feature. I just run that single scenario all the time, so I don't have to log in or repeat everything myself all the time. It's all automated. And second thing which is very useful is if you write custom steps, sometimes you want to access information you only got earlier. When you log in a site, you may get a login link. Where does that come from? You can't put that in your test because you don't have that link. It's a unique number usually. So and on line 6 you see what happens there. So and the user visits the first link in the email which I put there. But yeah, what is that link? Where does that come from? That's where you use a feature of Behat. It's called transform. So the transform function starts with a particular keyword and then some kind of regular expression. The first link in the last email, which exactly matches a piece of text between quotes and some kind of input to the system. So all input that matches gets put through a transform function, which can return the appropriate output, in this case the first link in the last email, which I held on to. Because one of my steps, for example, is step 5, and the validation email is received. That's just a custom step which checks an inbox, plugs out the first link, and makes it available for the next step. The other thing you want to do often is not simply run the test in the terminal, only see if pass fail. It is very handy to have that browser pop up, as I did in the first demo. You put a tag, you need to put a tag in there, JavaScript. If you put it in there, then actually the browser will come up. And that's, you can actually see all the steps through in the browser. Very handy feature. It's even more technical. If you use Behat, one of the annoying things you will see is that after you've run the test, it closes the browser. But often that's the point where it fails. And you as a developer want to actually try out a few things to see why does it fail. Interact with that browser which has just launched. So here is a piece of code you have to edit to remove that auto close. So don't try to remember that, but look back at this presentation later. Another thing what you like to do is often run things before a scenario, after a scenario, before a feature, after a feature. All these hooks are available. They're all in the documentation as well. So you run a cleanup test, for example. One of the things you often want to do is, I created these demo users, but they need to be removed before I can successfully run the next scenario. That's the kind of thing you can do. Or I can empty, I want to look at emails I have the system sends. Before I run the test, I just empty my inbox to make sure I actually can see new emails have come in. All these things possible. The other thing you may want to do is disable modules. Certain modules simply make testing quite hard. Mollum is no longer active, but the honeypot module is still in use. If you have these things present, then your login becomes very annoying. So you just disable the piece of your website. And Drupal 8 similar to install. Often you want to check for text in particular regions. The sidebar should have this text, or my message region should have that particular text. That's all possible in the to specify in the Behat YAML file. There's a region map option there where you can name, a random name, basically content, and say, this div, this CSS selector, that's where you need to look. And then you can simply write a scenario like this, give them on the home page, and I should see no front page content has been created yet in the content region. And that is where it has to be. Portable tests, maybe initially you may be tempted to hard code passwords. Don't do that, put them in the behat.yaml file, for example. There are options for that. It's all in the documentation, so I'll just show this. You know it's possible, and you can do it properly. And this is how they get passed in. Another option is a particular environment variable. For sensitive passwords, you can simply set an environment variable. And don't put them in a behat.yaml file, because the behat.yaml file goes into your Git repository. This may be publicly visible and should not have any passwords in there. Options to divide your code a little bit. The feature context file, that's where your custom steps go initially, may become very big. You can cut it up in various ways. You can simply create new PHP files to put custom code, and how to find that's all in this slide, so look at it later. You can even have subcontext, that's quite useful, so people can write modules and put some Behat specific tests, steps in there, so they can be made available as well. So if you have a big company which does a lot of custom module coding, why not provide some Behat custom steps in there for everybody to use? And this is how to do that, so look at that back later. You need to find elements. Two ways you can find elements on a page in your custom step, either CSS or XPath. This is just the technical thing to do, or how to do that. Running tests is very slow if you use a full browser. Often the good thing to do is run your test all the time. People commit to Git, then you actually want to run a full test using Travis, for example. In that case, Headless might be a real option. Chrome Headless, for example, I would say is the way to do that these days. But there are a couple of other options, Phantom.js, for example. That's all possible too, so you're not stuck to an actual browser. You can run a headless browser, which runs way faster. And still gives you full JavaScript, especially if you use Chrome Headless. The only thing, if you run Headless, the issue that you get is if it fails, what did it just happen? There's an option for that too. So if a Headless test fails, you can bring up a browser, with the current page, so you still can sort of investigate. It's not live; it's just a screenshot, but you can still see what happened. You can also execute JavaScript in your tests. That's something you will actually really need as a developer. I find always one or two cases where actually you want to run some JavaScript possible. What also happens is if you run tests, have been running fine for months, suddenly things stop working. What happened? Chrome got updated, Firefox got updated, some weird interaction between Selenium and your browser fails. So always do these two things: update your Chrome driver, and maybe update Selenium. Hey, things work again. So if you get weird errors, that's the thing to do. Full benefits of your tests. Developers, me, myself included, are very tempted to think they can write perfect code. This possibly can't break anything, which it will, obviously. So to keep yourself honest, your tests need to run all the time. That's called continuous integration. Every time you put something in the repository, something should spin up a test machine, deploy, run your tests. I think that's the only way everyone in the team is honest. It's a very old technique. In the 90s, Microsoft already used it. To recap, why do people not update websites? Things may break. Why are they afraid that it breaks? Because they don't have a test. So Behat, use Behat, so you can be sure, even if you upgrade things, you upgrade Drupal, it still works. You can tell how far a project is from being finished. It's very helpful when you have to maintain an old site. I had to pass on a site to someone, and he was very, very thankful for all the tests which were in there. Then he knew how the system was supposed to work, and he knew that if he changed something, that if it broke, that it was actually his fault. And as a great specification tool, Behat, in my opinion. Finally, what I suggest you do is read the first 6 chapters of the book to get even more excited about Behat testing, and start using it on the first bug you'll encounter tomorrow. And please feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.
If in your tests you wanted to interact with a change that was made by a previous user, how could you interact? If you had 2 different users, one that created an object, for example, and the second user had to interact with that somehow, how would you write that?
I simply log out. So I say log in as administrator, create piece of content, then I log out, and then I log in as that's the steps. Then I log in as normal, authenticated user, then I go to the piece of content, and then I should see this. That's sort of,
Would you use a hook?
Not
really for that?
No, because it would be one scenario. I think it would be very annoying. So you could write a custom step when I log in as this user, or then the next step when I log in as that role. That should do everything, like logging out a previous user and then log in as a new user. So it can be a single line, but clearly it states when I log in as this, and the second is when I log in as that, and then that can do everything that's needed.
Will there ever be a case where you run the tests on the terminal in all classes, and then you run it in the browser and it maybe it fails just because it's...
No, I've never seen that. No, it's usually the other way around. Say, hey, your test may assume JavaScript, and you're using some kind of JavaScript emulator, headless emulator, which is not perfect. So that's why I suggest you use headless Chrome, So you get a full JavaScript, exactly the same as your Chrome browser. They're identical. So, yeah. Thank you very much.